Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso and I'm here with Ayurveda. And this is the weekly mug chat, your opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism and our opportunity to answer. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then we'll start going through the questions and giving some responses. So if you'd like us to talk about Dhamma, you can go ahead and start typing in some questions as we start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Okay, so let's see. Looks like we have already a few questions. And hello to Ryan, Richard, Rick, Victoria, Hasanta, Kauser friends, Sean, Jayanta, and other people. Jody, Manal, Yankee, Bhumika, Gregory, and Mary. Hello. And it looks like the first question is from Ryan. Ryan says, in the final analysis, isn't all we can do is our best, i.e. keeping sila, meditate as often as we can, and hope for the best, since karma will dictate our fate, death, and rebirth anyway? Well, I mean, yes, the best you can do is keep sila, meditate, and hope for the best. That's true. I'm a little uncomfortable with the phrase, karma will dictate our fate, death, and rebirth, because you create your own karma. And in fact, keeping sila and practicing meditation and studying the suttas and so on, that's all creating karma. So the karma that you create by following the Eightfold Path has a tangible effect. It has a tangible effect on your fate, death, and rebirth, as you phrased it. So, of course, your past karma you can't change, but you can always create new karma. And that's what Buddhist practice is doing. It's creating new karma that changes the course of our accumulated karma so that we start moving in the direction of awakening. Okay. And Richard says, greetings from Bolivia. Greetings. And his question is, sometimes I work in my family's little hotel in my country where the law allows us to reject any potential guest for any of these three reasons: immorality, bad hygiene, and insolvency. And to reject them, we usually say there is no available room. Is that telling a deliberate lie when actually there are available rooms, but we are rejecting them with untrue but gentle words? Or if that's telling a deliberate lie, what could we say instead? Well, actually, I would say that saying there is no available room is still technically true, as in there is no room available to that specific person. But there might be an available room for somebody else who is not that specific person. So I would say that's actually not telling a lie. It's still technically true. I mean, this also comes up in monasteries. We sometimes get people who want to stay at the monastery, but there's no available room for them for one reason or another. Maybe they have a history of misconduct, or there's some indication that they're going to cause disturbances and problems in the community. So then there's no room available for them. And that's that. So I would not consider that a deliberate lie. I would consider that a true statement for that specific context. Okay. Now, what would be problematic is if you said something like, all the rooms are full, when actually there are empty rooms. That would be a lie. Okay. Okay. And let's see, what's our next question? We have one from Victoria. Is there any information available that says how much time there was in between fully losing the teachings of the previous Buddha in the world and the time that Shakyamuni Buddha came to be? I've seen that listed anywhere. Do you know if... There is a time between the previous Buddha and the current Buddha, but I can't remember what it is. But it is broken down because I know in the Mahapadana Sutta it talks about
and I believe also in later tradition, but I believe in the Mahabodhana Suttas where this comes up, where basically in some eons there is only one Buddha, and other eons there's actually several Buddhas. And I believe that Shakyamuni Buddha was considered to be, I think there was like 3 in the eon or something. So they kind of, it was like, it's exponential, kind of like the past Buddha was very far from the next one, but then that one was closer to the next one, and it kind of gets closer and closer. That's how it was, at least in the last 9 Buddhas or something. I don't know the math though. It's kind of a complicated, it has like there's a whole mathematical scheme. If you look in Digha Nikaya 14 in the Mahabodhana Sutta, it talks about this, but I can't remember the name or the time period of the Buddha Kassapa, right? That was the last one.
I don't remember. I've actually never really been too interested, because the more important thing is that we have access to the Dhamma now.
Yeah.
So like whether the previous Buddha was 5,000 years or 5 million years or like 5 million eons doesn't matter at all. The point is we currently have one, and that's the important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you do want to know the math, which neither of us seem to be the most keen on. Okay, and then Hasanta asks, in the 5 khandhas, are choices, decisions, kamma at the sankhara level? In other words, do we decide and then become conscious of our decisions later, and we don't make decisions consciously then?
Of course you're making decisions consciously. What is a bit more problematic is that often we're not paying much attention to what we're doing. But I would say you're always making choices intentionally, or else they wouldn't be karma. So the main issue is that we're making choices all the time, like hundreds of times a second, we're making choices. And most of those choices we aren't really paying any attention to, so we don't register them in our mind. So that might be where it seems like things are just happening automatically, but it's actually just because we're not paying much attention.
I think Pante, he probably means because of Vijnana comes after in the list. I think that's why I think that's probably why.
Well, maybe you want to talk about that then, because that's not what Vijnana means here. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if this is true, but it sounds to me from your question, Asante, you're saying that because it's at sankharas, and then we would only become conscious afterwards, because in the list it goes sankhara and then vijnana. So if that's why you're asking the question, which seems to me that seems to be the only way that would make sense, is that the list of the 5 aggregates, they're not in terms of time per se. It's not that like first there's the first one and then the second one and then the third one. Maybe you could, on certain levels, you could talk about time within certain degrees of the khandhas, but definitely not all of them. Because, for example, feeling and perception, what's usually translated as feeling and perception, in other suttas, it says that they must always go with consciousness. So you can't have like first feeling and then consciousness. So otherwise you wouldn't be conscious of the feeling, which is what you're talking about here as well. You can't have like first a sankhara and then you become conscious, because then it wouldn't have been a mental event in the first place. So consciousness is necessary for any kind of mental event in the sense of vijnana. Like any kind of mental experience, you have to be conscious of it in terms of the 5 aggregates. Otherwise, how is it mental? You're not experiencing it. So consciousness is always present with at least feeling and perception. And then I would say by implication also sankhara. Like as long as you're conscious, there is some level of volitional activity. And this also comes up in the definition of namarupa, so the definition of literally name and form, or mind and body. The Buddha defines this as the mental factors which are always with consciousness, as including intention, cetana. So that would include your definition here in terms of like where does decisions come in terms of consciousness. So when the Buddha talks about nama, which is always paired with vijnana, he lists intention in there. So you could say that basically they have to go together, because the Buddha elsewhere says that namarupa pacha vijnana, vijnana pacha namarupa. Namarupa depends on consciousness, consciousness depends on namarupa. So they go together. And so that would include intention. And by extension, that would include sankhara, because sankhara includes maybe you could include other mental activities, but if they're not occurring in a conscious mind, then they're not mental activities, they're some kind of other event. And then maybe what else is relevant here that comes to mind is that I personally think of the list of the 5 khandhas more in terms of subtlety, not in terms of time. So For example, first is rupa, like physicality, and that's more gross. It's more it's more gross or coarse than feeling, right? So like we have a body, and then we also have sensations, and sensations are more subtle. But more subtle than sensations are like perceptions, recognition, and these types of things. Those are harder to kind of see, right? It's very obvious when we feel pleasure and pain, but it's less obvious how our perception works. But that is more obvious than maybe all the subtle mental activities that the mind is constantly doing. So those can also be, in some sense, you could say they're more subtle. And then more subtle than all of those is consciousness, which has no content itself. It is merely the presence of other mental events. So that's the most subtle of all the aggregates. And so I tend to think of it more in terms of subtlety, at least on, if you want to think of the list in a particular order, I would more go that route personally.
Okay. Let's see what the next one is.
The next one is from Visus Michael Hare. Do the results of bad karma still arise in deep states of meditation like jhana? Can bad karma be exhausted and experienced in a minimally unpleasant form by abiding in these states?
So do the results of bad karma still arise in deep states of meditation like jhana? Well, I mean, one example of how the effects of bad karma might manifest is, well, first off, difficulty in entering jhana in the first place is to some degree the result of past bad karma, and also present bad karma for that matter. And then also if one does enter jhana but loses it quickly, or has a hard time maintaining or stabilizing or re-entering it, then that would also be a result of karma, and particularly negative karma, bad karma. So that would be a way that you could say the results of bad karma arise also during jhana. And can bad karma be exhausted and experienced in a minimally unpleasant form by abiding in these states? Karma doesn't really work that way. Rather, cultivating samadhi is generating strong good karma, and that strong good karma then dilutes the effects of bad karma. But that doesn't mean that the solution to bad karma is just to hang out in jhana all the time. That's not necessarily going to mean that, like, then you'll never experience the consequences of your past bad deeds. There's actually an interesting story from the commentaries, and I don't normally quote the commentaries, but this is a funny story.
You've quoted them a few times recently.
Yeah, I know.
Have you been reading
apparently
the commentaries?
I'm getting no. I think I'm just getting early senility or something. Getting old, so now I start quoting the commentaries instead of the suttas.
Yeah, and then sneaking them in the room.
Anyway, there's a cute story of a monk who was practicing meditation and was in jhana, and he had an enemy who really hated him, and the enemy was like, yes, now's my chance to kill this monk, and went up and tried to set fire to the monk to burn him alive while he was meditating. But according to this story, the monk's karma from practicing jhana was so pure that the fire burned the ground around him and burned the robe right off his body, but the monk himself was uninjured. So then later on, the monk emerged from jhana and found himself, well, naked and surrounded by ash, and wondering, like, what the heck just happened here? So I wouldn't take this story too seriously, but the point was that even though the monk was in jhana, somebody still tried to kill him, and tried to kill him in a very painful and unpleasant way. So yeah, I wouldn't say that just being in jhana is going to automatically mean that your bad karma is either going to miss you or happen in a really mild way. It can still happen. It's just that you're also generating strong good karma at the same time, which will tend to, over time, will tend to dilute your bad karma. But that may not happen right away. So I actually think the story from the commentaries is realistic, except for the part about the monk not dying. But somebody trying to kill you while you're meditating, totally possible. Just being in jhana doesn't mean that, like, the bullets are going to miss you or something. It just means that you're going to be in a really good mind state when your death comes, which in and of itself is still worthwhile. Okay.
And another one from Richard. Richard says, I believe that there are some conceits that are wholesome and a lot of conceits that are unwholesome. Could you elaborate on this and give some examples of the wholesome and unwholesome conceits?
Well, I mean, briefly, I would just say that a wholesome conceit is one that leads towards awakening, and an unwholesome conceit is one that doesn't.
Just an example in the suttas. Actually,
Oh, go ahead.
maybe that's
Oh,
useful.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
There's an example in the suttas where the long story short is that, well, maybe I'll give the slightly longer story, is that there is actually
Long story, medium long.
medium long, yeah, is that because it's a funny story, though a little bit disturbing, is that actually one of the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, was given a message that there is a bhikkhuni who is sick and she wanted to see him. And so she called him over, like, oh, could he please visit me in my room? And so Ananda goes to visit the bhikkhuni, and actually she was trying to seduce him. And so then he realizes this, that like she actually wasn't sick, but she just wanted to call him in there so that she could seduce him in her room. And then he tells her, like, he gives her a Dhamma teaching, and he tells her, sister, the conceit is to be overcome through conceit. Desire is to become overcome with desire. And then at the end, he tells her, but sexual intercourse is not to be overcome. It's never to be used. Like, it's not part of the Dhamma practice. But in the particular interesting part is that he tells her that conceit is to be overcome with conceit. And he tells her that, if I recall correctly, he tells her that if a monk sees someone who, for example, is achieving a lot of success in their practice, and they're doing really well in meditation, or they heard that they've been announced to achieve some kind of state of enlightenment, and then they think that they feel kind of their ego is hurt by the fact that that person has it and they don't have it. So there's a sense of kind of inferiority that then they spur and they arouse a lot of energy in order to realize enlightenment. So that's the sense of, like, it is unwholesome to have a sense of inferiority, but in this case, it's actually necessary to have that motivation that our ego is it's driven in order to end itself. Otherwise, we will just be contented with having a sense of conceit. So that's maybe one example I remember in the suttas of that.
Yeah, or on the other side of that would be someone who's like, I'm a good practitioner. I know I can attain awakening, so let's go. Let's do this. It's possible. I'm a great monk. I can do it. So that kind of conceit of superiority might also inspire you to make progress towards awakening, or the conceit of equality of like, look at Vedda. He's a great monk. I'm just as good as him. If he can do it, so can I. So yeah, definitely. Conceit can be used as a tool to make progress towards the ending of conceit.
And then Hasanta asks, I ask, as there is some neuroscience findings that activity in the brain is observable with choices seconds before the person says they have made a decision. Yeah, I know what he's talking about, actually.
Yeah, it just doesn't have anything to do with Buddhism. Because just because somebody's not aware that they've made a choice, well, that just shows that their mindfulness is weak. That doesn't mean that the mind is functioning automatically. It just means that the person's mindfulness is weak.
Yeah. And also, actually, Hasanta, not to, I don't know the details of this, but I do remember actually talking to a monk who studied psychology about this. And also someone who has studied neuroscience or neurobiology or something. And he was telling me that actually later on, it's a famous study. I hear a lot of Buddhist people quote it, but actually it turned out that it wasn't what they said it was about, was not actually later. It was disproven to not be the case. It was actually similar to what Bhante is saying. It was not exactly what they think was happening, was that actually the person was anticipating the movement, and the anticipation was what they were detecting. But it's also true that, like, yeah, you could actually, someone could report like, oh, I wasn't aware, but actually we do things all the time without being aware of them, and just because of a lack of mindfulness. So it's not clear that just because someone didn't feel conscious of something and their brain was moving, that doesn't necessarily mean that choices are determined in the brain. There's a lot of things that could be going on, like, for example, lack of mindfulness, or the fact that they were just anticipating it. Okay, and then Kumo says, is the very peaceful state of mind we feel when we listen to Dhamma talks or reading the suttas and Dhamma books a lower level of some kind of samadhi state? During these activities, of at least 3 out of 5 hindrances are absent.
You want to talk about that?
Okay. Well, I would say that the Buddha does talk about, for example, when the mind is listening to the Dhamma with a whole heart, like completely one-mindedly, he does talk about that. He talks about ekagacita in terms of focusing on the Dhamma talk. And he also, there's a famous sutta where he says that at that time, when someone is completely, with their whole heart, their whole mind, focused, listening, and engrossed and absorbed in hearing the Dhamma, that all 7 awakening factors are present and all 5 hindrances are absent. So that would include, one of those awakening factors would include samadhi. I would say in terms of at least 3 out of 5, and in terms of like just a general peaceful state of mind though, I guess what we could say what qualifies for having a completely focused mind on to that extent, I would say is quite high. Like if you're just kind of chilling on your couch and you're listening to a Dhamma talk and you feel very peaceful, I wouldn't consider that a state of samadhi, but you could consider that maybe it's a wholesome thing. Like you're enjoying the Dhamma, you find it calm and you're not obsessed with hindrances at that time. But I think what the Buddha is pointing to there is something a little bit different. It's like when the mind is just completely absorbed, it's almost like a Zen koan, but in terms of it's just completely absorbed in the Dhamma, and that's when someone can have a breakthrough. But it's not just like a general peaceful, like, oh, I love Dhamma talks on my couch. But it is a wholesome thing, so that's also, you could consider it like getting there. Like you're definitely moving towards that, and maybe you're developing certain awakening factors, right? Like you're developing more mindfulness in terms of paying attention to the qualities of the Dhamma, and you have some energy and you have less hindrances. So that is definitely wholesome. So maybe you can consider it like you have a level, you're developing some samadhi, you have a degree of samadhi. But I wouldn't put it on the level of like, oh, you don't need to meditate anymore because you listen to Dhamma talks. It's a particular instance, but it's not like a replacement for meditation.
Yeah, it is something that can support the later development of samadhi, though. So that kind of serene joy that comes through listening to the Dhamma or reading the suttas or contemplating the Dhamma, that kind of serene joy then will strengthen your samadhi practice when you practice meditation.
Okay, then we have one from Harry. It says, I have an error in view I don't know how to correct. When I contemplate impermanence and that all sankharas are dukkha, I start feeling quite cynical. Like any good actions I do, ultimately, will not matter unless I break through to stream entry because they are impermanent. This cynicism makes me not value my meritorious actions as an ultimately beneficial thing, though it is beneficial on a relative level. How can I cut through this cynicism so I can view impermanence without this deep aversion?
Well, I mean, one thing that I would encourage you to remember is that if you want to attain stream entry, then that depends upon also cultivating a fair amount of good karma, actually quite a bit of good karma. So your good karma is not futile because it's helping you progress towards stream entry. I would also encourage you to pay attention to that cynicism as being a unwholesome mind state, a manifestation of aversion, and therefore something which is itself an obstacle to awakening. And also to encourage you to remember the Buddha's instructions. The Buddha said, do not be afraid of merit. Do not be afraid of punya, of good karma. So the practice of good karma is still an integral part of Buddhist practice, even as part of the path to awakening, even as part of the path to stream entry. Okay.
Okay, this is from MC. How can one deal with strong sexual urges on the path of renunciation?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, when you say on the path of renunciation, I assume you mean practicing celibacy, but I assume you're also a layperson. So, I mean, one thing that can definitely help if you're struggling with strong sexual urges is that checking, well, how often are you practicing? Are you just, for example, practicing celibacy once a day? I mean, once a week? Once a day would be, I guess.
Like I made it 5 minutes today.
Once a week or once a month, even, right? Twice a month or something like on the Aposita. And in that case, I would say that the reason that you're probably struggling is because only think about it like this, right? You train a dog once a week And then the other days of the week, you just give it everything it wants and you let it be completely undisciplined. And then you wonder like, oh, why is the dog difficult to train the one day a week when I train it? So our mind is like that, perhaps even worse, because not only is our mind just kind of in a natural state, but naturally we are, you could say, we are already inclining towards greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's not like we're neutral and then we just act out of these things every now and then, but naturally our mind is inclining in that direction because it's already moving with greed, with craving. So if you only restrain it once every now and then when you stop, it's not just like, oh, now your mind is kind of at a neutral level, but it's actually retraining itself. You're training it towards sexuality, for example, in this case. So I would say that's one thing to check, is that, are you practicing celibacy not just a little bit, but more consistently, more regularly? If you're not doing it more regularly, then I would also just wonder, like, why would you expect yourself to be able to get over it, right? It's like, I want to overcome eating donuts, but I'm only going to stop once a week. Then it doesn't seem that you actually want to. It seems that you just want to stop eating them once a week. And in that case, you should just expect that you're going to be craving donuts because you don't actually want to let go. You just want to temporarily stop. And so you can't have unrealistic expectations. Like, if you don't actually want to let go of sexuality, then you can't expect to let go of sexuality. It's just a 1-to-1 equals 2, right? So you don't want to let go of sexual desire, so you're going to have sexual desire in your mind when you're not practicing sexuality. That is a natural conclusion. If you do want to let go, then I would say then you have to commit to celibacy 100%, right? Just like if we want to attain awakening, it's not like, oh, I'll only commit 50%. Then you're not going to get 100% awakening. So if you want 100% freedom from sexual desire, you have to commit, I will not involve myself in sexuality. That's why monks are celibate. That's why celibacy is such a major part of our rules. So I would recommend that you can reflect on what is the point of this practice for you at this time. Why would you be aspiring for something if it's not realistic at this time? And that's totally okay. I mean, I don't recommend it, but it's okay if you choose that. And if you do want to let go, then commit yourself more. And then once you do that, definitely I would also say checking not just the external, but also remembering that part of sexuality, part of sexual urges is in our mind, right? So it's, for example, you're practicing celibacy, but then if you're constantly thinking about and reflecting on and focusing on the features and details of people or things or events or whatever it is that triggers sexual urges, then you're going to be constantly kind of stirring that up in the mind. So it's also practicing sense restraint. And it's recognizing that in order to successfully train the mind and tame the mind from these passions, we have to not just restrain the body, but we also have to restrain what we're paying attention to, what we're reflecting on, what we're thinking about. So like when you interact with people, don't think about what triggers or arouses sexual urges. Think about, for example, how they're virtuous people or how you can have compassion for them or things like that. And then when you're thinking about the body, don't think about it in terms of a kind of object of sexual desire, but you can think about it as, for example, a vehicle for Dhamma practice, or you can reflect on the unattractive aspects of the body, right? Very classical practice of reflecting on, this person is very attractive, but if I cut open their body, it would be leaking with blood everywhere. There would be feces and urine and all kinds of fluids, and they would be screaming in agony. So that would not be very attractive. But that is actually most of the body. Most of the body is filled with, as the Buddha says, impure things. So another place is, you could say that it's repulsive, right? In some senses, not naturally, but it's, to us, if we were to see someone's intestines spilled out all over the floor, that would be repulsive to most people. That would just be not attractive. But actually, most of the body is things like intestines and hearts and liver. So one of the practices in Buddhism is reflecting on that. Not to hate people's bodies, but just to understand that the body is not mostly attractive. It's actually mostly filled with things that we don't find attractive. And the things that we do find attractive aren't inherently attractive either. Classical example of this is that people's hair, right? People are very obsessed with hair, both our own and others. But when a hair falls in a soup or when a hair falls in our food, it's not beautiful. We usually find it disgusting. So things that we also find attractive, in and of themselves, they're not. It's a kind of projection that we're putting onto it. So those are types of things you can do, right? Training the mind to think about things and people in different ways. Think about them as people to have compassion for, as people whose bodies are not objects of desire, but actually are filled with things that are not usually attractive. And hopefully that helps you. But you have to commit 100%. Otherwise, it's going to be always an uphill battle. He says, why do some people seem naturally more drawn to Dhamma?
Past karma. Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. People who have been committed to spiritual practice for many lifetimes will be naturally more drawn to Dhamma. And people who have been committed to worldly matters will be less interested in Dhamma. So that's just the results of whatever we've done in the past.
Okay, and Joseph has a question. Hello, Joseph. Warmest wishes, Venerables. Could you expound on the meanings of Sukho Buddhanang Upado, Sukha Sadhamma Desana, Sukha Sanghasa Samaggi, Samagganang Tapo Sukho? And he says, what do you think of translating this last verse as happy is the warmth of the harmonious?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, that is definitely a very cute translation, but it's not really accurate. So
happy is the warmth of accurate translations.
Yeah. I do understand where you're getting it from, though, Joe. So the word that you're translating, the main problem here is how you're translating warmth. So harmonious, in terms of like samagganang, yeah, that you could say that means harmonious. Literally, the etymology is people who are on the same path. So that means like in harmony, or they're kind of together, right? We're all walking on this path together. So there's a sense of harmony. And so, yeah, it does mean harmonious, but tapo doesn't mean warmth. It literally comes from things like fire and warmth and heat and so on. But what it means in the applied sense is actually spiritual striving, austerity or fervent practice, or striving. So it's things like the extreme side is even asceticism, like things that the Buddha rejected as too extreme asceticism. But it can also just mean generally spiritual striving, like, for example, practicing meditation, right? Getting up in the morning and doing meditation, doing chanting, doing acts of generosity, and going out of your way to protect your speech. So all of that is striving, right? We have to be fervent and ardent, and we have to apply ourselves. And so what it's saying there is that it's blissful, it's happy when people who are practicing and striving the spiritual path together, basically. That's the basic meaning of what it's saying. So it's not about their warmth, like their emotional kindness, but it's actually about their spiritual striving.
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's this question. It says, Venerable Buddha, kindly share some reflections on mudita. How was your first visit with Venerable Nipako and Venerable Kevala on first arriving back to the monastery?
The danger is that he's assuming you had mudita.
Oh,
I'm assuming you did have
mudita. I did have mudita for that, yeah. How was my first experience? It was, I mean, I don't know, I don't have any kind of profound reflections for you, Joe. I'm really sorry, but I was rejoicing in them, and I was happy, and it was really good to see how they were doing well and doing happy. And actually, I sent them an email when I was in Italy, because I realized that I hadn't sent an email yet. And they both sent emails back, and it was really warm and friendly. So I was really happy to have 2 more siblings in the Dhamma, and to be, also really rejoicing in their spiritual striving. I think that's, for me, what was most touching about becoming a monastic, is that more people in the world practicing renunciation and dedicated to the Dhamma. So, it's really beautiful.
It's odd.
And then Joseph also says, could you speak on saddha, I think he means saddha, as a vital condition for joy? How wonderful it would be if all 6 recollections of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, Sila, Chaga, and Deva arose simultaneously in your hearts. So I'll do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds to me like you already have a sense of it. So when we have faith in the Buddha and we reflect on how wonderful it is that we have contact with the Buddha, at least through multiple generations, but still, that there is a Buddha within our cultural memory that causes joy. How wonderful that somebody attained full awakening and taught it to other people, and that was just a few generations ago. That's amazing. What a cause of joy. And faith in the Dhamma. When we have faith that there is a body of teachings that leads to full awakening, and that we have access to those teachings. Well, again, how joyful, how wonderful. And the Sangha, that there is a format that the Buddha gave us for spiritual community, a format for living a dedicated spiritual life, and that we have contact with members of the Sangha, might even be members of the Sangha in our case. So having contact with the monastic Sangha, and being able to appreciate how contact with the monastic Sangha supports our practice. Again, what a joyful thing, what a wonderful thing. So yeah, absolutely. Faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha is a basis for joy. Okay.
Okay, and Kumo says, I finished reading the Majjhima Nikaya, based totally on your advice a couple of years ago. Going to read it a second time, but while doing that, I'd like to start on another. Any advice?
Ingutra Samyutta. Yeah. First off, congratulations on finishing the Majjhima Nikaya. That's a great accomplishment.
Sadhu.
And rereading it is always good, because on the second read through, it will make a lot more sense than on the first one. The things that didn't make sense will start to make sense, and the things that you thought you understood, you'll understand much more deeply the second time through. So definitely rereading it is a good idea, but it's also fine to start reading another collection. And if you do, I recommend either the Samyutta or the Anguttara. Those are both really good. Do you have a recommendation, one or the other?
I mean, at
Or
this
just
point, I would just have
rereading?
another. Oh, this. No, yeah, I think those
Okay.
are both. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and Joel also asks, I hope you are well and happy. Does the community have adequate access to the 4 requisites?
I think so. Yeah, you seem to be doing okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Sadhu, hope you're happy as well, John. And then Visas says, are the immediate results of actions the results of karma? Like if I intend to think wholesome thoughts and then those thoughts arise, or I intend to move my arm and it moves.
You can answer that one.
Okay. I mean, yes, they are the results of karma in the sense that obviously karma just means deeds or actions. So yes, it is the result of our actions. If we move our arm, then yes, it moves. Like if I say hello to someone and they respond back, that is clearly a result of me saying hello, right? So it is a response. It is a result of karma, not in the sense of like, It's a little bit different, though, I would say, because let's say that you say something mean to someone, and then because of you having that intention, your mouth moves, right? So the mouth moving is a result of the intention of moving your mouth. But actually, but that doesn't exhaust the karma. The bad karma that you create of saying something mean and harsh could affect you actually in the future. So it's not like the effect is over. It's more just that karma can have many different effects. It can affect in different ways. So it's not like that is the result, but rather that's one result. But it's not the result in the sense that we would usually that matters the most in the sense of like ethical results of our action. That's more just a kind of a physical result, or kind of just basic, like kind of succession condition, kind of like one thing conditioning another. But usually when we're talking about the results of karma, we're talking more about the ethical results of our actions, not just the result of the physical action itself.
Okay.
Okay, and Joseph says, I'm interested in studying pagan practices. Do you have any suttas to study that are similar in tone to the Brahmadeva Sutta? Want to learn more of how the Sangha is worthy of offerings to the gods?
No. Yeah, just don't. Yeah, just don't go there. If you want to do offerings, just do Buddha Puja. Time-honored practice of honoring the Buddha through making offerings. Or if you want to get fancy, do pujas to the different Mahayana bodhisattvas. But I don't really recommend getting involved in pagan practices and animism. These things are, at best, they're just tangential to Buddhist practice, at best. So if done very carefully, they're not necessarily harmful, but are they actually beneficial? In my opinion, not really. If you want to do devotional things, then do devotional things to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, not to others, not to other beings.
Okay. And then Navisis asks, since everything is arising and passing away constantly every single moment, any kind of results over time are the results of karma, right? At least over these moment-to-moment rebirths.
Yeah, I mean, technically, everything we experience is the result of karma. So yeah, it's technically true. Yeah. Okay.
That's quick.
Yeah. Sometimes a quick answer is all one needs.
Okay, I think this is a question. Mano says, welcome back, Nubada. Thank you, Mano. Of the 7 bhojangas, I've noticed that the piti is one which fluctuates the most. For example, if I'm at the monastery, it seems more purposeful and recognizable, whereas if I'm at home, in the home setting, it becomes significantly less. Am I doing piti incorrectly, and would it fluctuate so much dependent on environment?
Well, it sounds to me like you should spend more time at the monastery. You want to answer this one?
Sure. Okay. I would say you're not viewing it incorrectly. It's very normal, right? This is the way of the world. This is what the Buddha says, that things arise and cease, that things are impermanent, that they're conditioned. So I would more focus though on your mind states. Like it's not the monastery that's causing the piti, like the building itself, right? Otherwise you could just build one in your backyard. But it's actually the mind state that we have towards the place. And yeah, usually at home, at least for me, when I went home, it was not as pleasant as being in a monastery. So that is understandable. So I would say though, it's not the home, right? It's not the monastery, but it's what's going on in the mind. I remember actually in the past, someone told me that, I can't remember the specifics, but they told me that they struggled a lot when they were out, but when they came to the monastery, their heart opened up a lot and they were feeling a lot better. And clearly it wasn't the building, but it's like when they're in that space, they just, something in the heart can open up, right? So maybe you feel less aversion and restriction and tension in regards to all the activities you have to do at your house, right? When you're in the monastery. So then you can see, well, how can I bring that attitude to the house? And then you can start to develop the same piti, right? Or maybe you have a lot of faith when you're in the monastery because of the statues or the monks or the other lay people. So then you can think, oh, how can I recollect all those good things that bring faith to my heart? And then that can bring joy. So it's not incorrect, but it's more that you don't want to focus too much on the external conditions. So you should come to the monastery more because that definitely helps. But also when you are at home, you can also reflect, like, what was it at the monastery that was triggering this? Because the direct result, although there are many conditions to things, the most important one in this case is the mental condition, because PT is a mental state. So most important is the mental condition, which is going to be some kind of mental state you're developing. Okay, and Madeline says, my parents struggle with the fear of death and do not believe in rebirth. What are some things I can do or say to offer comfort?
Well, what I would recommend is to remind them of the good things they've done with their lives. Remind them of all their good deeds. This is assuming they've done some good deeds. Probably they have. So remind them of their generosity, their morality, their kindness, their compassion, especially personal things that have touched you personally, things they've done that made your life better in one way or another, or things that you've personally observed them do that were meritorious or praiseworthy or that benefited others. So reminding them in this way that they have done praiseworthy, meritorious, good things with their lives that have touched other people's lives in a positive way. So yeah, I mean, of course, talking about rebirth isn't going to help them very much if they don't believe in rebirth. But what you can do instead is just talk about the enduring positive effect that they've made on the world during their lives. And that might give them some uplift and solace.
And Victoria asks, what is it that carries out the results of our good or bad karma? Is there said to be a universal intelligence that determines when and how our karma is delivered?
Well, let's rephrase this a little bit. What is it that carries out the results of gravity? Is there said to be a universal intelligence that determines when and how gravity takes effect? So, for example, when you throw a ball up in the air, then of course God comes and grabs the ball and then throws it back down at you at specifically the right force. Is that how it works? You throw the ball up in the air and then the cosmic judge gets involved and is like, okay, now I have to apply gravity in exactly the right way at the right time. No, we just understand that gravity is a natural law. It acts according to predictable rules. So it may not always be easy to calculate precisely because there's a lot of variables and factors involved. But we know that there actually is a basic natural law in operation. And we can see the general effect of gravity. It may be really hard to calculate precisely because of all the intervening factors, but we see the general effect and we get the general idea. And we don't think, oh, there must be a universal intelligence that knows when and how to apply gravity correctly. We just understand that gravity is just a natural phenomenon that operates according to its own causal principles. Well, karma is exactly the same way. Karma is just a natural law of the universe. And it operates according to relatively predictable patterns. Although there's a lot of contributing factors which can be hard to account for, which is why it's hard to predict precisely. But the overall tendencies of the law of karma are pretty much just like any other natural law. We can get the general sense of the direction things are moving in. Okay.
Yeah, I think I heard that if the scientists still can't calculate they can't predict three bodies rotating each other yet.
The three-body problem. Yeah. There's actually a lot of things like that where, in theory, the constituent natural laws are more or less understood, but when they interact together, it's basically unpredictable. So they know that there's natural laws underlying it. They just can't quite figure out how it works. Yeah, so that is something. It's like we think like, oh, the natural world is so straightforward and clear. And it's like, well, if scientists can't even figure out how the natural world operates, why are we expecting them to understand karma? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and then Hasanta asks, is piti experienced only during deep meditation, or can it be an after effect as well? I.e., the mind is joyous in the hours after meditation, but might be just calm and peaceful during.
I'd say both. It's just a matter of degree. So you can have some degree of piti when you're not in meditation. And this is mentioned in a number of places in the suttas. The Buddha is using piti in a way which is clearly not talking about jhana, but rather an experience that's not during meditation. But during meditation, then piti is when it can become extremely strong, extremely powerful, to the point where it completely dominates one's physical and mental experience. But it is fundamentally the same experience, the same euphoria. It's just a matter of degree.
Okay. And Joe says, just for clarification, I'm interested in reading more suttas with skillful means to deepen faith and appreciation for the triple gem. How the Buddha used religious language to teach the Brahmins. Okay, so you think it's
about the
suggestions? I think he's asking for suttas similar to the Brahmadeva Sutta, which I'm not sure what that is.
I just recommend reading all the suttas cover to cover. Like this is, you'll catch everything you need when you do that. Yeah, I don't recommend, it's kind of like the, I shouldn't make analogies of things I don't actually understand, but in fishing, there's line fishing where you're trying to get a specific, like one fish at a time. And then there's dragnet fishing where they just like drag a net through the water and just catch everything all at once. So I recommend dragnet sutta reading. Like, don't try to like fish out specific suttas, just catch them all and you'll get everything you need that way.
Okay. And MC says, how do I know if I'm truly progressing in meditation or just sitting still?
I mean, one of the best ways of noticing is over a period of time, is the overall wholesomeness of your mind increasing and the overall unwholesomeness of the mind decreasing. And over a period of time here, I'm talking about months to years. So are you progressing in meditation? Well, sometimes the way you notice you're progressing in meditation is not during meditation, but rather it's when your mom says something rude and you realize it doesn't really bother you that much this time. And you're like, oh. Or your brother starts ranting about his far-right political views, and you're just like, okay, man. Yep. Yeah, how's your kids? So that's more sometimes when you realize like, oh, my meditation actually is working. It's when you realize that your mindfulness, your equanimity, your serenity, your joy in your daily life has been gradually increasing. You start to notice that your mind is less dominated by desire and aversion and confusion than it used to be. So it tends to be more of a gradual effect over a long period of time. And then that's when you might realize, oh, this might be because of my meditation practice.
Okay, and Lisa says, what's the best way to curb the impulse to intellectually think about Dhamma too much? Sometimes it conditions wholesome mind states, but I end up getting so caught up in it that I confuse myself and scatter my mind and break the mental peace I'm trying to cultivate.
Go ahead. Perfect question for you.
So what's the best way to curb the impulse to intellectually think about the Dhamma too much? I mean, reflecting on the purpose and benefits of the Dhamma. So the Dhamma is not taught for, like, I'll give an example, which maybe is a bit obscure, but I think it's relevant. Is that in Christianity they had a period called scholasticism in the Middle Ages. So like basically monks and basically just writ just volumes and volumes of theology books. And famously, there's a very famous theologian of the Catholic Church named Thomas Aquinas, and apparently I haven't studied Thomas Aquinas, but I know a little bit about him. And apparently at the end of it, he wrote a very famous thing called the Summa Theologiae. So it's like this massive book on like answering all the questions about God and everything in the Catholic world. And apparently at the end of his life, he had some kind of mystical experience, and he was like, yeah, everything I wrote was wrong. Like it just wasn't relevant. It just wasn't touching what we were actually going for here. And so obviously we're not Christians, but you can see the point, right? So it's like, obviously there is a certain purpose and there's importance to the intellectual side of the Dhamma, but the purpose is not scholasticism. It's not like going over all these different things, all the different details. Rather, the purpose is actually touching the Dhamma yourself. The purpose is actually to practice the Dhamma, to receive the fruits of the Dhamma. And that's why the Buddha gives the famous simile also of the raft, specifically for this type of problem. Says that the Dhamma is not to be grasped onto, it's just to be used to cross over. So there's a famous sutta where the Buddha tells the monks, he's questioning them about right view, and it turns out the monks have right view. And he says that as pure and bright and flawless as this view is, if you were to grasp it, would that be for the sake of the Dhamma that I've taught you as a raft for crossing over? And the monks say no. So the Buddha is saying even right view, even this someone who has very pure right view, that's not to be grasped, because the point is not to grasp onto views about the Dhamma. And so even more so, just kind of intellectual speculation, right? So yes, it's useful to an extent, but you can just kind of reflect like, oh, well, what is the benefit of the Dhamma? Is it to publish the Summa Theologiae of Buddhism, or is it to actually practice and receive freedom from suffering, right? And so to that extent, you can actually measure like, well, how useful is this particular train of thought or this particular endeavor, right? If it's useful for clarifying something, like if you have doubts about, you don't understand how rebirth is possible, or you have doubts about meditation, then yes, you need to look into that, right? Talk to teachers about it and read the suttas and so on. But if it's just like, oh, I wonder about what is the mathematical principles between the different Buddhas and the different universes or whatever, then yeah, sure, maybe there is one, right? But is it really worth working that out? What's the benefit?
Okay.
Joseph says, I love the questions of Sakka Sutta as another example. Do you have any sutta suggestions that have lots of talk with Brahmins and Devas? I'm interested in contrasts comparing Zeus to Sakka, or visiting a Hindu temple to see the difference of how the Buddha taught.
Yeah, again, just read through all the suttas. You'll catch all the ones you want, as well as a lot of other great ones.
Okay, Ryan says, Dear Bhante, could you speak on why is stupor? Torpor. Yeah, sloth and torpor. Okay. Sloth and torpor is so hard to get out of, please. I think get out of. Is first jhana a must for ridding of sloth and torpor, or is there another way? Thank you.
Well, it's hard to get out of because once you're in that dull, sleepy state, then you basically can't do anything because you lack the clarity and awakeness to actually do anything about it. So all you can really do is wait for it to wear off, which it does eventually. That is actually one way of dealing with sloth and torpor, this dullness and drowsiness during meditation, is just wait. And it goes away eventually on its own. So that's not necessarily the ideal way of dealing with it, but it is a way of dealing with it. Just wait, it goes away eventually. But that's why it's hard to get rid of, is because you lack the alertness and energy to do anything about it. So it's usually better just to not let the mind get into that dullness state in the first place. So be very attentive to when the mind is slipping towards dullness and stop it before it moves too far in that direction. And is first jhana a must for burning off sloth and torpor? That definitely helps because it's impossible to have sloth and torpor in first jhana. So yeah, progress of training the mind in jhana, you will naturally clear away sloth and torpor because it's just impossible to access jhana if there's torpor in the mind. Okay.
Okay. And this is a question Joseph says. I was studying the ritual of arti in Hinduism. Is there any merit in waving lights around the monks and nuns, Bhante? What's the Buddhist equivalent? Maybe metta? Instead of arti, we offer harti?
Please do not wave lights around me. I mean, if making light offerings to a Buddha statue brings you happiness and joy and strengthens your faith in the Dhamma, then I think it's fine. But I don't go waving lights around me. I'd really rather not. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
You get Christmas lights. Okay. Nick says, I have a tenant who is keeping kumantong. I don't know what that is. What is?
It says at the end.
Oh, kumantong are child spirit from Thai shamanism. I just knew. Okay, so they're keeping child spirits from Thai shamanism. What is your best advice to me? Will the kumantong remain in the house after the tenant left?
I advise doing a lot of metta meditation and dedicate merit to the spirits. That's what I recommend. And if they remain, then that's perfectly fine. They have as much right to be there as you do. So your practice is to do a lot of metta and dedicate merit to the spirits, wishing for them to be happy, for them to be safe, for them to experience serenity, and for them to cultivate wisdom, and for them to make progress towards awakening. And if they want to stay in your house, great. They're welcome to stay in your house. As long as they don't cause any trouble, as long as they're respectful towards Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, they can stay as long as they want. No problem. Okay.
And Harry says, how do you perform Buddha Puja at home? There seem to be many ways in chanting manuals.
Yeah, that's true. There are many ways. So find a way that touches your heart. Find a way that feels right to you. So the practice of Buddha Puja is about cultivating a sense of respect for the Buddha, appreciation of the Buddha, and you want to find a way of doing that feels right to you. So there are many different ways of doing Buddha Puja because there is no one set format. So look into some of the ways that people do Buddha Puja and see if there's some way that really touches your heart. And you can start doing it in that way.
Victoria says, does the Buddha talk about how negative mind states can directly affect the health of the body?
I think so. Can you think of something?
Actually, yeah, one thing comes to mind. Actually, there's a few places in the suttas and especially in the Vinaya where it's not exactly a teaching, but it's more implied, and it talks about how when someone has remorse, and it says that they look their whole body becomes like I can't remember the exact description, but it's very physical. It's like they're kind of like weak and gray, and it talks about how basically remorse, like heavy remorse and anxiety, how it makes the person, kind of destroys the person from the inside and their whole physical appearance. And then other monks will sometimes go up to them and they're like, "Wow, you look really bad." But it's not exactly maybe a health condition. It's more of a, I don't know if that's. Is there
Yeah,
anything
it's
else?
just I can't really think of anything. And the Buddha really wasn't that concerned about physical health. Um, yeah, it just doesn't. It's not really a major feature of his teachings.
Actually, another one though that comes to mind is the Bhujanga suttas. Those are not really.
Yeah, but it's just kind of tangential. Like it's
Yeah.
never really a central topic.
Yeah. Okay. And Rick says, can you talk about ways delusion impacts right effort? How do we practice in this state?
Well, I mean, briefly, when we're delusional about the Dhamma, then we don't understand how to apply ourselves correctly. So we might think that good is bad and bad is good. So that's a quite simple example. Cultivating right view then will support right effort, because in order to practice right effort, you need to understand what is good and what is bad, what is wholesome and what is unwholesome, what supports awakening and what obstructs it. So right view is the necessary precondition for practicing right effort. This is why I keep emphasizing the importance of reading the suttas. Because if you read suttas, then that will help you establish right view, which then makes the rest of the path possible.
And Visa says, my mind is currently stuck on Kamma and its workings, but it's just confusing it. What is the right way to contemplate Kamma?
How would you answer that?
I mean, personally, I would say that what's most important with Kamma is really the kind of meat and potatoes, the basic teaching. The whole point of Kamma is not a sort of metaphysical theory about everything, but it's just when you do good things, then you're building up good conditions for yourself in this life and the future. And if you do bad things, you're building up bad conditions for yourself in this life and the future. That's really what the Buddha is talking about. You're not going to find a sutta where the Buddha gives an Abhidhamma explanation of how Kamma affects the arising of all the different physical things. Like he's really teaching, it's practical. So, and that is actually something you can see. And that's how I would contemplate it, right? When you do something bad, it's not good. It affects you in that time. It affects you later. And if you have faith in the Buddha and in the monks who realize that, then you can realize it'll also affect you in future lives and so on. And that's really what matters. And then when you experience good and bad conditions, or when you see other people in good and bad conditions, you can contemplate if someone is in a good state. Oh, for example, I could do good deeds to experience that as well, if it's relevant, right? If someone's a really good meditator, you could think, oh, I could also do Kamma and eventually build up to that state. Or if someone is very generous, you can think, oh, I can do Kamma and build up a very generous mind. And if someone is very experiencing a lot of suffering and a very horrible life, you can think, oh, I should use this as a reminder to have compassion, one, of course, but also for yourself to not do bad things. It's one of the divine messengers. So seeing the suffering of the world. So that's really what matters. It's not the specifics of like, how does the Alaya Vijnana function or whatever. That's just not, that's not the point. Okay, and Scott says, please dedicate merit to my teacher, Aya Santachari, at her time of a family need. Bhante, you spoke of Sanya yesterday when speaking of the aggregates. How can I understand Sanya more deeply?
Well, so what I recommend is when having any kind of sensory experience, distinguish between the sensation itself and the label that we put on the sensation. So there's a little step there which happens in the mind. So there's the raw sensory input itself, and then a split second later, we start putting a label and a concept and an identity onto it. And we start then spinning thoughts and ideas around it. So try to catch yourself in that moment when there's actually just raw sensory data coming in, but before we start labeling it, conceptualizing it, and thinking about it. That's what I'd encourage. And in doing this, then you'll start to understand Sanya a bit better. Okay.
Okay, and then Joseph says that he had an insight studying Greek mythology and relating it to Dhamma. The wife of the god of medicine is the goddess of soothing pain. Made me think of Ajahn Brahm teaching we can't always cure, but we can always care. Let's just see if this is a question. It looks like a yes. We all must experience old age, sickness, and death, so seeking care as a vital medicine of Dhamma arose. Could you speak on the etymology of the Pali words karuna, anudaya, and anukampa? Specifically, anudaya, that one I don't hear as often as the other two.
Actually, don't remember off the top of my head the etymology of anudaya.
I don't either. I don't know.
Yeah, it is a much less common word. Karuna, as I recall, is from the word kar, like karma and karoti and all that.
Yeah.
Anukampa is from kampati, which means to shake or to tremble. So anukampa, to tremble together. Karuna means action, which, interesting enough, it's compassionate action. So karuna is not just a mind state, but it should affect how we act. But anudaya, I don't remember. I'd have to look it up.
Look it up, or
Nah, another time.
Oh.
We can look it up another time. Yeah. Okay.
I think
so. Then
maybe there's one here that it's in the middle of this one here. Max says, I recently came across some Buddha Trump statues being sold online, which I found amusing. Would this kind of depiction be considered disrespectful?
Max, I think you already know the answer to that question. Just the fact that you had to ask this already means that you already know. Yeah.
It's funny. Okay, that looks like that's the end of the questions.
Okay, so I guess we can go ahead and conclude it this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.